Thank you, everybody, for coming. We're going to get started here. I hope everybody had a chance to walk around and look at some of the terrific items that are on auction. We thank our host, Heritage Auction House, and Jim Halperin for having us. So first off, let's thank us for having us. I understand others have done venues here, and it sounds like we're particularly lucky to have it full of beautiful items. That's maybe not always the case here. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and thank Julie Branson in particular. I'm sorry, Jim will have the mic. For Julie Branson for putting this on. Julie heads up our Dallas Business Club Events Committee. And just to back up, my name is Cameron Larkin. I'm the president of the Dallas Business Club this year, and thank you very much for attending. Our speaker tonight, Mr. Jim Halperin, started his first business at the ripe old age of 16. He and I had a chance to speak ahead of time, and we found out we're both Northeastern guys, and we had this common connection from Massachusetts up to Vermont. And it turns out he had a relationship with our past governor, Jim, Mr. Dean, Howard Dean in Vermont. So I thought that was an interesting connection for any of you Democrats. That same year, he was given early acceptance to Harvard College. Instead of staying and graduating with an MBA at Harvard so that he could be a member of the DDC, he start a business after only 3 semesters. And I understand his father is an MBA, so possibly he could be an honorary member of the DDC. And after today, he certainly is. Despite this brief lapse in judgment, Jim clearly went on successful. In 1982, Jim joined forces with his business nemesis, arch rival, and friend, Steve Ivey, to create Heritage Auctions. Tonight, he will tell us how his team of rivals went on to build the 3rd largest auction house in the world. Please welcome Mr. Jim Halperin.
Thank you. We have a gift for you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Julie, and thanks to all of you for coming tonight. I want you to feel free to interrupt if anything isn't clear to you or if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. The story necessarily starts with me, since I didn't start meeting my partners until I was a teenager. So there I am, and that was probably a more natural pose for me. But I had really, really great parents, and I appreciate that Cameron mentioned that my dad was an MBA. He is the hero of the story, and he was and is my #1 role model. That's my mom, and that's my dad. And he really was a prototypical member of the greatest generation. He got accepted to Harvard from Wakefield High School. He was a lower middle class Jewish kid, and he was accepted to Harvard at age 15. Enlisted on his 17th birthday, soon after Pearl Harbor, and left Harvard to join the Navy. Served as the youngest line officer in the Navy on the St. Louis, and then returned to Harvard on the GI Bill, graduated in '46, and was a member of the Harvard Business School class of 1949, which I think a lot of you probably would recognize. These were some of his classmates. Really a legendary, probably the most famous business school class of all time. But that wasn't what interested me about my dad. I just thought he was the greatest dad imaginable. This was our house growing up until I was until I was in second grade. It doesn't look like much, but it was a nice place to live. That was in Natick, Massachusetts. And that's my dad with me and my first sister, one of 3 sisters I eventually had. And he was really a remarkable guy. He had a lot of friends. I can't even count how many people told me that he was their best friend. And he just loved everybody, and he adored my sisters and me. Was always there for us. Was so much fun to be around. I can't remember him ever raising his voice. My mother was the disciplinarian of the house, the enforcer, and she was actually pretty nice too. But the thing that I really admired the most about him was his business and what that represented. He used to take me with him to his office since I can remember, maybe since I was 3 years old. He would take me maybe once a month with him to work. Sometimes on Saturdays, sometimes during the week, and I would sit and play with the adding machines and kind of chat with people, and over the years watched his little manufacturing company. He had an advertising specialties business that he had started right after school. And I watched it grow from 10 or 15 employees to a few hundred by the time I was 11 or 12. And they were always so happy to see him when he walked in the room, and he knew all their names, and he knew all their stories. And I wanted to be just like he was someday. I wanted to be able to walk into a company and make the decisions and lead it, and just kind of do what he did. He had built the life that I always wanted, and I wanted to. Of course, I wanted to go to Harvard, and I wanted to do pretty much everything that he was doing. Now, this was us after we moved to a little bit nicer house, and I was probably 8 or 9 in that picture. And by this point, I had been practicing my business skills for quite a while. I would say I had businesses since I was about 6. Sold blueberries door to door, lemonade stands, neighborhood circuses and astronomy shows, and I bought and sold anything that I could think of to try to make a little bit of money and to hone my skills. And by the time I was 8 or 9, I got pretty good at enlisting neighborhood kids to join my projects. I would kind of suck them into my vortex. I was very enthusiastic about any kind of enterprise. And so I continued to have lots and lots of projects all through my childhood until the day that my father betrayed me. This was 1963. I was 11. He was 37. And I still remember, like it happened yesterday, he woke me up at about 11 o'clock one night, and he said, "Jimmy, I wanted you to be the first to know. Today, I sold the company. I sold it to Dymo Industries." This was New York Stock Exchange conglomerate. And they were his best customer. And he said, I feel really good about this. They're a wonderful company, wonderful people. They're going to take great care of the company, and which I knew meant they would take great care of his employees. And I'm going to run it for a couple of years for them, and then I'm going to retire, and that means that I'm going to have more time to spend on political causes that I care about and charities, and your mother and I are going to travel all over the world, and we will take you and your sisters with us whenever you're not in school, and we're going to have a really, really great life. And I looked up at him, and I'd never seen him happier or calmer or more sure of himself, and he was a very confident man all the time, but I had never seen him look better, and I said, "What do you mean you sold my company?" Well, that was when I knew that I had to start businesses not just for practice, but figure out how I was going to make my own way in the world. Now, about that time, my parents decided that since they now had quite a bit of money, they were going to send their kids. They were going to send us all to private schools if we wanted to go. And so we applied to several local private schools, and I was accepted at Middlesex School in Concord. Started there as a freshman and continued my various enterprises. I was publishing, at that point I was publishing comic book fanzines and magazines, and I had a little mail order business. I moved my bedroom into my parents' basement, so when I was at home in the summers or on weekends, I could get all the neighborhood kids to come over and work on whatever project I happened to have at that time. And over the next couple of years, the basement filled up with mimeograph machines and collating machines and Selectric typewriters and file cabinets and Pitney Bowes equipment and lots of neighborhood kids after school, including some seniors who could drive me back and forth from Middlesex School in Concord to our house, which was about 20 minutes away, and have me back by curfew. And I usually would make a little bit of money, enough to pay my employees and the expenses and have a little left over for spending money. And really kind of kept doing that all the way through school. I even had a print shop in Cochituate, Massachusetts, about a mile and a half from our house, that I would ride my bike to, and I had an adult running it who had been a printer, and we made business cards for local businesses and printed their circulars and things like that. In my junior year at Middlesex, toward the end of my junior year at Middlesex, I was elected business manager of the class. I was the only time that there was ever a unanimous election of a business manager. And my main job at that time was to run the snack bar, which I did in my typical gonzo fashion. I decided to give all the students credit and tripled sales. I actually went to the math department and spent about a week programming a billing system on one of those computer terminals that had the little tapes coming out of them, and you had to get it completely perfect, or you'd have to start over. It took me, I think, 6 afternoons to design a billing system. And I loved computers because they did exactly what they were supposed to do, and the only time they ever did anything wrong is if you screwed up the instructions. So I did that during my junior and senior year, the end of my junior year and beginning of my senior year, and as a summer project, I also converted the print shop into a stamp business. And that was really I called it Jim's Stamp and Coin Shop, figuring that I would have an extra product line that I could learn. I knew a little bit about stamps. I knew even less about coins. And my uncle, I convinced my uncle to let me handle his stamp collection and pay him a little more than he had been offered by another dealer, and he gave me a year to pay. So that was the seed money for starting Jim's Stamp and Coin Shop. Here's an article that appeared in the local paper. That's me on the right, and next to me is a fellow by the name of Gary Walls. He was my first employee. He came into the store one day and asked if I had coins, and I told him I didn't really know anything about coins. I just called it Jim's Stamp and Coin Shop because I planned to carry some if I could, if anybody wanted to sell me any. And he said, well, I'll teach you about coins. And he came to work for me for free for a couple of months, followed by a couple of other kids who came to work for me for free and showed me Coin World and Numismatic News and the Red Book and Brown and Dunn, which is a grading guide, and kind of taught me how to value coins. And I really, really had a knack for the coins. It was pretty apparent right away. Every time I saw a coin, I remembered what it looked like. When I saw another one, I remembered whether it was better or worse than that one. If I sold something, I remembered how much I sold it for. I remembered how much I paid for it. And within just a few months, I was riding my bike down to other coin shops in the area. There were coin shops everywhere back then. And buying from one dealer and selling to another. And that was all throughout my senior year at Middlesex. I was running this coin business in the afternoons, either getting people to drive me or I got my driver's license pretty early on that year. And that was my life at Middlesex. I also got early acceptance to Harvard right about at that time. There's another Jim's Stamp and Coin Shop window. And here's my admission form. So now I'm a coin dealer, and I have a staff, and I'm over a period of maybe 18 months. I've turned nothing into $100,000 inventory and a car and no debt. And at that point, I decided to start going to coin shows. Anything I could drive to, pretty much, even while I was at Harvard. And I was at a coin show in Boston in 1970, and all the big coin dealers were there. And I got to finally meet my heroes who were running all the big ads in Coin World, and they were all very friendly and really sort of respectful, considering what a little kid I was. And my favorite was a Texan by the name of Steve Ivey. And he sat down at my table and talked to me for about 20 minutes, bought a few coins, and asked me a lot of questions, which I took as friendliness. He was probably pumping me for information too, but he really was very encouraging, and I decided by the end of my senior year at Harvard, my first year at Harvard, that I really wasn't nearly as interested in going to class as I was in buying and selling coins. About halfway through the next year, I got my revenge on my father by telling him that I was taking a leave of absence. he was very understanding about it, but I could tell that he was disappointed, but also very encouraging. And so I opened up a coin business in Framingham, and this was the building that it was in, but we just had a quarter of one floor. And I hired a secretary and a couple of other coin people, and started out as a full-time coin dealer at the beginning of 1972. 1972 was a terrific time to start in the coin business, because everybody, well, precious metals were going through the roof, and everybody was starting to look for alternative investments, and coins were still cheap, and it was very easy to make money in the coin business, especially if you worked hard at it and had a good sense of the values of the coins. So over the next 2 years or so, I managed to build New England Rare Coin Galleries into one of the premier new coin companies. By the beginning of 1975, I was probably almost a millionaire. I'm now 22 years old. And my father, who had since, he had stayed with Dymo for 5 or 6 years rather than the 2 he promised them, because they kept begging him to stay, and he really liked them. But now he was fully retired, and he said, you know, I'd love to come in and help you take your business to the next level. And I jumped all over that. So my dad went and got me a management consulting firm. He went out and hired a management consulting firm, and they recruited a seasoned 35-year-old operations officer manager by the name of Charlie Lidman, really a very bright, hyperactive guy. I tried to get a picture of him for this presentation, but he's in Italy, and so he didn't have anything on his laptop when I contacted him this morning. But he was really, he had all the, he filled in all the gaps for me. And my dad also suggested that maybe we ought to computerize. And I remembered the computers from his place, from when I used to visit, and they took up half the stage, and they had punch cards. But by the mid-1970s, IBM had mainframe computers that were maybe only the size of this desk right here, and could do, I guess, about 1,000th as much as my iPhone can do today. But it was more than any other coin company had. And he called up IBM and asked them what kind of terms I could get, and they gave me a deal that I could afford, and we hired a programmer, and we sat in meetings with Charlie and my dad and the programmer for several months, and designed the storyboards and figured out exactly what we wanted the computer to do. And he programmed it, and we tested the hell out of it, and at the end of about 7 or 8 months, we had the only computer system in the coin business. And it was a huge advantage, let me tell you. We could find every transaction that we had ever made. We could manage the mailing list without having to remember anything. I had 6 or 7 coin employees by that point, and it made them 3 or 4 times as productive. It made me more productive. It was almost as if I was still running my coin shop, because we had instant access to all the information just by pulling it up. And within a couple of years of that, I had the largest rare coin company in the world, about a $15 million coin company at that time. And as a going away present, because my dad, wasn't planning on staying forever, but as a going away present, he also said, I could call some of my friends if you think now is a good time to buy coins, because they were still cheap. And I could get them to invest in a fund. Sounded like a great idea to me. He said, you'll make a really tiny fee, if anything, up front, but you'll get part of the profit when you sell them, if you pick the right time to sell them, you can auction them. And so he raised $360,000. He actually sold one or two shares to Ned Johnson. Does everybody know who Ned Johnson is? People didn't know who he was back then, but he was the CEO of Fidelity Investments, which was a pretty small company back then. They were trying to bring stocks to the mainstream. They had mutual funds back then, but they were really trying to make it so that you didn't have to be connected to invest in the stock market. And so he bought a couple of shares, and some people bought half shares, but he sold 24 shares, and that was when we decided we were ready to move to Boston. So, the other thing that I did in 1975, my other stroke of luck, was hiring this guy. And I don't know exactly when this picture was taken, but probably right around then. This is my best friend, Mark Emery. And he had just graduated in 1975 from University of Pennsylvania, and was a very savvy coin collector, not really a dealer. And he applied for a job right out of school. I think I was the first person he asked. I barely knew him at the time, and I hired him on the spot at a coin shop. And he moved to Framingham, he moved to Framingham. This was before Boston. And after a year or so, we became roommates or housemates, because I bought a house in Newton when we moved to Boston. And he spoke, at the time, I think he only spoke 7 languages. Now he speaks 10. And that was his girlfriend, now his wife, Elizabeth, who lives with him in Dusseldorf, Germany. He now runs all of our European operations, but at the time he was a coin dealer like me in Boston. That's me. When around the day we moved into Boston, we had a great corner location at the corner of Devonshire and Water Street, right across the street from Fidelity's building. Actually, I think by the time we moved there, Fidelity had 3 or 4 buildings. They were growing like a weed. But we had a beautiful location that was that really became a mecca for the Boston financial community. A lot of people were collecting coins in the late 70s. Our company just continued to grow and grow through 1979. I think in 79 we probably had 150 employees, and we're doing $30 or $35 million, maybe more. And Sotheby's came calling, and they sat me down, or I think he was the CEO, but he may have been working with the CEO. But sat me down, and he said, "We want to get into coins, and we want to own the best coin company, and that's you." And he offered me a deal that was worth $22 million. And Charlie Lidman and I, and my dad, of course, I called, but Charlie Lidman and I basically agonized over this for 6 months, whether to take this offer or not. And finally, we declined. And my dad thought I should sell, and I was kind of on the fence. But at the last moment, we declined. And then in 1980, I felt like a genius because the company made $10 million pre-tax the first half of the year, including selling that coin fund at auction, the one that my dad had put together. And keep in mind, this is early 1980 during the hostage crisis. Everything is really in the toilet, except coins and precious metals. And the stock market was dirt cheap. People were getting wiped out. A lot of businesses were going under. And we sold that coin fund that we had paid $348,000 for the coins for $2.3 million at auction, and paid each investor about $70,000 for his $15,000 share. Saved several businesses, kept some of the partners out of bankruptcy. It was just a wonderful time to sell it and a great experience. And then around the middle of 1980, the market completely collapsed. The coin market had just gotten too frothy, and prices started going down by 10 or 15% a month. Meanwhile, Charlie and I had a disagreement about whether to continue to grow the business or pull back, and I wanted to continue to grow, and he didn't. So he decided to retire and move to Arizona, and I went through a succession of really bad CEO choices, one right after the other. And by the middle of 1982, after having turned down $22 million from Sotheby's, I owed about $1.5 million more than I had. So I went from, pretty high flying to insolvent. And that's when Steve Ivey called me, my arch rival again. Steve is the guy with the beard in the middle. That's him in probably 1982. And he said to me, Jim, my business isn't so good now either. But obviously, he was in a lot better shape than I was. And he said to me, I think that if we join forces, we could do really, really well right now. And I'm so sure of that I will sell you half of my company for a note, non-recourse note. You can put your auction company and your European operations into the mix, and I'll buy those from you at a fair price and pay you now. And you can sell the rest of the business to your employees. And the only catch is that you have to move to Dallas. And I had just met my wife, but I didn't know she was going to be my wife yet. I liked her a lot. But, well, we had just met. And and my parents had moved to Florida. And one of my sisters was now in Seattle, and one of them was on the verge of moving to France to get married there. And so I didn't really have a whole lot holding me to Boston anymore. And so I took him up on the offer. One of my better choices probably made up for a lot of my really bad choices of the prior couple of years. So we started. That was probably him a couple of years later, and we started working together immediately. And everything that he predicted about the business was absolutely right. We had about 50% more overhead than either of our businesses had prior to the merger, but we had 100% of both of our sales volume instantly. And we just started making a ton of money right away. And he figured out efficiencies in our European operations that allowed us to buy a lot more coins over there. He figured out how to get financing. He took care of all of the business end, and I just had to buy and sell coins. And we had a great business going almost instantaneously. Now this guy, this is Bob Merrill. This is a very recent picture of Bob Merrill. He looked a lot younger back then. But Bob Merrill was running our auction company, or running Steve's auction company. And when we merged, when I merged ours into it, he ran both of them. And it was really a second-tier or third-tier auction company. It was an afterthought to our business. We were wholesale coin dealers. But he wanted to build it, and I wanted to build it even more. I didn't like the idea of just being a wholesale coin company. I wanted to be more like our friends in Boston at Fidelity. I wanted to sort of bring liquidity and availability to the coin business. And I didn't think that we were contributing to that at all. I mean, I didn't mind buying and selling coins to help pay the bills, but I wanted us to be retailers. And so, we tried everything to try to get us accepted as a mainstream coin auctioneer, and it was really, really tough. We had three really strong competitors, Bowers and Morena, Stax, and Superior, and they got all the good collections. In fact, one of them, their motto was, when great collections are sold, Bowers and Morena sells them. And Bob Merrill used to joke that when great collections get sold, Heritage gets jealous. So finally, I should mention that in 1984 I got married. That's Mark Emery standing next to me as my best man, and my beautiful wife is sitting right there. And here she is dancing with my dad. Back in Dallas, Steve and I were kind of raking it in, except for the auction business. So we got the idea that we would buy up all the coin show rights, because that was really the only way that we could compete with the brand that these other auction houses had. A lot of people like to sell at coin shows because they feel like that way nobody has to worry about, that way they don't have to worry about nobody showing up. And so we bid double what our competitors were used to paying for A&A auctions, and which I think we paid about $75,000 when they were used to paying $35,000, and we got 3 or 4 of them in a row, which really kind of ticked off our competitors. But all's fair in that business. I think competition is a wonderful thing, and we didn't get mad when they beat us on deals. So they were usually good sports about it. And we managed over the next 2 or 3 years to claw our way solidly into the second tier. We were probably at that point, we became the number 4 or 5 auctioneer in the country of coins. And this is a book I wrote on coin grading at the time, because I was trying to get the field to be a little bit more, I guess, homogeneous. Every dealer was grading their own coins, and there was a lack of liquidity as a result of that, because you couldn't really depend on what a coin was going to look like from one dealer to another. So I wrote a grading guide and started a grading service where people could send in their coins and get our grade on it. And that was very successful for a year or so, and until a huge competitor, a much better designed competitor, sprang up called PCGS, and we supported them after they came out. And then another grading service called NGC in 1987, we supported them too, and eventually closed down NCI, but they used the grading standards in this book. in 1987, we hired this guy. We hired the one on the left. The one on the right is the one that works for us now. That's Greg Rohan. He is now the president of Heritage. And he was a closing machine. He really knew how to sell our auction company. Very, very honest guy, and he would always make sure that the consigners were extremely happy with the experience. But he was a great, great closer, and he was the one who really convinced us to get on a plane the minute we had any inkling that a big collection was going to be was up for grabs for consignment. Right? He would be on a plane before our competitors could write a letter in response to the consignor's inquiry, and he just started bringing in tons and tons of consignments. And he also helped us hire this guy to run our gold department, and this guy, our esteemed general counsel, who now looks like that. And Charlie Lidman returned about that time too. I managed to convince him to come out of retirement and move to Dallas for a few years. And between then and the time Dave was born in 1991, we actually clawed our way up into the, I'd say, the first tier of the auction business. We were maybe the third largest auctioneer by that time, and continuing to grow by leaps and bounds. Now, in 1994, we were approached by a major retailer, and they offered us a really, really lucrative deal to tone down our retail business and supply them with coins. And after a lot of discussion and arguing and more discussion, Steve and I decided to accept the deal. And it was a pretty good deal for a while, but it wasn't what I wanted to be doing, so I went on half-time for a couple of years, and I wrote 2 novels. And very fortunately for me, and ultimately for Heritage, this was kind of right at the beginning of the internet. And what I did with this novel, which took me 3 months to write and 6 months to rewrite 22 times. What I did with this novel, The Truth Machine, which I put a first edition in each of your bags in case you're interested. But it was a novel about a foolproof lie detector and what happens when it's unleashed on the world. A very futuristic story. The timeline is about 60 years. And I put the novel on the internet while I was getting ready to self-publish it, and along with a survey that you had to fill out every 5 or 6 chapters or so. And you could read it for free. And in 2 or 3 weeks, I got 15,000 surveys. And people were telling all their friends about it and putting it up on news groups. And NPR did a national story on it, a very flattering story that this was really a novel idea. Not to use the word novel, I hope. But and eventually, Random House, who had seen a copy of the manuscript because a coin dealer friend of mine who writes coin books for them had shown it to his editor, and they had passed it around. And right around the day, I think it was within the same week that the books arrived from the printer for self-publishing the book, they called me and said, "We want to publish your book, and we want to make it our lead fall title." And they did, and it sold 300,000 copies. And of course, this was right at the emergence of Amazon. And like any author, and I'm sure there are several authors in this room, like any author, I was on Amazon every day looking at what rank it had and what comments people were making. And, it got up to number 2, by the way. And, and I studied what Amazon was doing. And of course, I had thought a lot about what the internet was going to look like when I wrote the book. And I just really got a very, very strong vision about what an internet site needed to be. And so in 1998, actually, we'll skip Doug, even though he's a pretty important figure in the company. But in 1998, Paul Minchell, our chief operating officer, hired Brian Shipman, who is now our chief information officer, who hired Michael Weems, who's our e-commerce director. And they, along with a fellow by the name of Jay Freeman, built a website that I pretty much, well, Paul and I, but mostly me, designed. And we did the same kind of thing I did with the book. I gave away information that nobody was used to getting for free. We put all of our auction records in an archive that any member could access for nothing. We put a price guide up that anybody could access for nothing. We launched a completely interactive site where you could bid and get outbid notices, and this is way before other auction companies had that, other than eBay. We basically did everything that I would have wanted from a website as a collector. And at that point, I was already collecting comic books again, trying to relive my childhood, because that's what we do at my age. And so I thought about what I would want as a comic collector, and I just assumed that coin people would want the same thing. And we also we put my grading guide, my coin grading guide online, and we had something called My Collection. This was Paul Minchell's idea, where anything that you bought, you could see your purchase price, and we would value it for you. We would fill in the price guide price, so people would, even that hadn't bought coins from us, would list their collections and be able to track what they were worth. We also had a feature called My Want List. We had this even before eBay had it, where you could fill in keywords and get notifications every time something came into our inventory or at auction. And we had tens of thousands of people sign up for that. And by 2000, we not only had the #1 auction company, coin auction company, but we were growing faster than our competitors and almost double our nearest competitor in volume. And this was a business that we had really just started 20 years ago, and they had been in business for 80 or 100 years. So we decided that maybe we could expand into areas that we didn't know that much about. And fortunately, we were approached by these guys who looked much younger 10 years ago, but that's Len Glazer and Alan Mincho, two of the top United States currency experts in the world. And they had a great currency auction company called Currency Auctions of America. It was the second largest, and they had built it over many years. And they said to us, we're going to get run out of business by Lynn Knight, who had the largest, because he has a website and we don't. So why don't we just come to work for you, and you can acquire our business as part of the deal. Well, we instead negotiated a deal where we actually paid them some money for the business and paid them a little less of the upside, which turned out to be better for us, but they were real happy with it. And within a year, their currency auctions were outselling Lynn's by double. And they're still with us, even though they're really, really, really old. And of course, I was even more restless when that worked. And I wanted to sell everything at auction, because I figured the coin business is so competitive, there's nothing that could be harder than coins to compete with. Because we had been scraping our way up to the top of that business for decades, and it was really, really hard. And so I suggested that maybe we could try comic books. And my partners just laughed at, well, my one partner at that time, and my future partners just laughed at me and said that was ridiculous. We didn't know enough about it. And I, at every executive meeting for months, I just kept bringing up the idea until finally I knew that they were either going to throw me out of the room or I would have to offer them something. So I did. I offered to put $500,000 worth of comic books from my collection at auction, unreserved, if they would let me run one comic book auction. And so they couldn't turn that down. That was guaranteeing them that they weren't going to lose any money on the auction. So I went and I hired a local comic collector by the name of John Petty, and we put together a pretty respectable auction of mostly my stuff, but a few other consignments. And I also got my oldest son's best friend's dad to put together a tiny movie poster consignment. He was a very serious movie poster collector by the name of Gray Smith. And he was looking to get out of his current line of work, which was production management for major films, a really grueling job. He was away from home for 3 months at a time sometimes, and would often work 18-hour, several 18-hour days in a row, and was looking to get out of that. So I said, why don't you put together a movie poster section? If it goes well, then we'll figure out a way to divvy up the commissions and try to make a business out of it. So he agreed to that. He put some movie posters together, and we had our first sale. And to give you an idea of the comic and pop culture market at that time, it was owned by Christie's and Sotheby's. They were the only credible players. They would have 1 to 2 auctions a year, averaging maybe $1.5 million per auction. And the most a comics auction had ever brought was $2.2 million, maybe in the mid-90s. And the most that the entire industry had ever done in a year was less than $5 million. We did $960,000 in our first auction, and it was good enough that my partners said, okay, let's keep going. Our second auction was 4 months later, and it did $2.3 million. Our third auction was 3 months after that. We did it at a comic show, first time that was ever done. It brought $5 million. Stan Lee, who I had met at a charity lunch a few years ago, consigned his collection to it and got lots of his friends to consign. And the sale after that, we got Nicolas Cage's collection and sold that auction for $5.2 million. We did $15 million our first calendar year in the comic auction business, just by having a really great, easy-to-use website. And that was sort of the beginning of Heritage Auctions. That was when we changed our name from Heritage Coin Galleries to Heritage Auctions, and moved into moved into our tower at Maple from our little space in Highland Park Village. These are the comic guys, and that's Grayson up in the corner there. And now we've added, we hired this guy Warren Tucker to start in WorldCoins, and it took him 4 years to build that from maybe the build us from maybe the 100th largest WorldCoin auction company to the #1 WorldCoin auction company in the United States and probably #2 in the world. It took Steve's son, Chris Ivey, well, he's a little bit of an underachiever. It took him 6 years to build our sports department from somewhere in the top 30 to #1. And here's some more of our management team and partners. We've started taking in some really great partners. Todd Inhofe is one of the best coin guys in the country, as is Ryan Carroll. And Chris Birnbach took over the WorldCoin division from Warren, or is in the process of taking it over from Warren, because Warren is 75 years old. And we all kind of, in this business, we all kind of love it enough that we want to die at our desks, but we do work a little less and less as we age. And these are our categories now. And we're thinking about adding quite a few more. Cars is the one that I'm really hoping to add. We're looking for a great car guy now. And I'd also like to add charity auctions, because I think that would give us a chance to really help worthy charities raise a lot more money. And we have a lot of customers that I think could be convinced to bid on experiences like my Stanley lunch. In fact, I bought the 2 of the first 3 or 4 lunches with Warren Buffett back when they were cheap. They were $20,000 and $25,000. Now they're 100 times that much. So that's kind of where we are now. We're attacking the categories one at a time. We can't. It's hard to compete with Christie's and Sotheby's in fine arts, but we managed to go after little niches, and we're now probably close to their level at illustration art. And I think we can probably compete with them very well in California art and Texas art, and several other niche categories that will hopefully eventually grow into the bigger art categories. But what I really like about Heritage is our philosophy. We just never do any deals, and we never have to do any deals that don't benefit both parties. Every deal we do is win-win, or we don't do it. And we are, like Fidelity was in the mid-'70s, making collectibles accessible to people so that they can make intelligent decisions and they don't have to know anybody to get expertise. And they don't have to worry about selling for too little or paying too much, because we will tell them or help them research what the items are really worth. And if they overpay, it's because they really want it and they know they're overpaying, not because they were misled. And I love the fact that we're in a business where we're dealing with I don't want to say retail, but we're dealing with the public and not just dealers. And we're helping to build a form of wealth, kind of a new form of wealth that and create wealth for a lot of people. And it's much less cyclical. A lot less can go wrong in this kind of business than it could back in 1980 or 1981 when I had my little implosion. In fact, in this recession, we never had a bad quarter. So I think we've really built something great. And I think my dad would be, well, I know my dad is very proud of it. This is my succession plan. I think my partner may disagree with that succession plan, but I know my son doesn't. That's Mikey. And hopefully it won't be soon. And I would welcome any questions. Well, Gail and I collect Maxfield Parrish paintings and Harriet Whitney Frischmuth sculptures. Gail was a professional dancer in New York when I met her, a modern dancer. And Harriet Frischmuth sculpted in the 1920s and 30s. She actually lived from 1880 to 1980. But she sculpted in the 20s and 30s, and we saw one of her works in the Tulsa Museum. I think right before we got married, we decided that we'd like to maybe someday own that sculpture, that exact one. And we do, along with a lot of others, but most of them are really small. This one was a pretty big one. And I collect comic books and comic art, as I said before. And I'd say, I think my favorite is I have the original Harvey Kurtzman logo and border art, which is all the cover art from the very first issue of Mad Magazine. Yeah. You know, it's been a double-edged sword. A lot of people needed to sell in 2009, but prices, of course, came down because there was forced selling, but they didn't come down that much. They probably came down, at the worst point, they probably were down 30% from the peak. And a lot of people who needed money, actually a lot of our customers sold their coin collections, bought stock in their own companies for pennies on the dollar, waited until the stock recovered, sold a little bit of the stock that they had bought, and now they're buying coins again. But I would say that probably it was a neutral for us, because some things got better and some things got worse. I think it's been great. I think Dallas is a wonderful place to have a business, especially if you have a business where you need to travel, or where some of the people in your business need to travel. And we like to get on an airplane the day we hear that somebody wants to sell, because we want to be the first ones to talk to them. And Dallas is fantastic for that. You can get any place in the country within a few hours from here. And it's a wonderful business climate, and a great employees. Fantastic attitude. Everybody very friendly. Absolutely. Just a matter of when. I don't know if I'll live to see it, but I hope I will. I think absolutely, yeah. I think we have a much better business model than they do. We certainly have a way better website, and that's becoming more and more important. Just as an example, and they do, it's a daunting task. I mean, we're not even an $800 million company. They do $5 to $6 billion each. So they're a lot. I mean, we're a very distant number 3 now. But our website gets about twice as much traffic as their 2 websites combined. Well, it's a huge threat to eBay. I mean, it's a huge threat to some companies, but I think it probably helps us. I mean, it's our strategy. You know, we're kind of a niche business in 30 different categories, and that's really our business model. We just go after them one at a time, and whenever we have some profits, we take those profits and start a new category. Huh. You mean like what's overpriced? Or, yeah. I don't know. You know, I'm not always right about those kind of predictions. So, you know, very often, as with any investment, sometimes the frothier they are, the higher they go. You know, the more people want them. So, short term, I really could not predict. You know, and even long term, it's tough because you just don't know what people are going to want. I do think that there are some fields that are obviously dying. I think that stamp collecting is just never going to come back. You know, you go to a stamp show and the average age there is 80, and you know, people just don't. And you know, I mean, stamps were the first thing that I collected and the first thing I dealt in, and I think it's really pretty obvious that people are not going to buy stamps for much longer. We're probably not going to have stamps for that much longer either. And I'm kind of sad about it, but I think that's an obvious. I wouldn't call it a bubble, although at the top end, some stamps are quite valuable, of course. But I don't see that as lasting. I think that'll kind of go the way that postcards went in the 1920s. You know, they just kind of peaked and never recovered. I think that's. Oh, sure. Well, no. Wonderful question. No, no, it actually is a very good question. I don't know how I would divide things into that category because there are, you know, art dealers buy paintings for resale, and you or I would buy a painting to put on our wall, you know, or you know, because we think somebody in our family would like to have it in the room or whatever. I think it really depends more on the buyer. You know, and there are certainly jewelry auctions where the only way a piece of jewelry is going to sell is to a dealer who's going to break it up, you know, and sell the diamonds separately from the, you know, and melt the gold. And then there's other pieces that are, you know, timeless. So it just depends on the item and who the buyer happens to be and what they plan on doing with it. I don't think it's by category. In other words, I think it has more to do with the individual and the buyer. Of course, in every category, things have potential. You know, coins are prototypical of that, of course, but and as is jewelry. But usually, you know, dealers will buy a painting because they think that it'll clean up really well, you know, or it needs some kind of restoration. And of course, there are investors as well. Not everybody buys something for personal use either, or because they collect it. They buy it because they think that it's going to be a good investment. Some do.